With 2023 behind us, should we look forward to or fear 2024? The prospect of continuing conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, along with trouble brewing in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, plus a global economy that's building an ever bigger gap between rich and poor. Can we look forward to a better world in the year to come? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is 2024. While the world witnesses conflict on a scale not seen for more than a generation, much of the global population still relies on the promise of democracy to bring change for the better. 2024 is set to be the biggest election year in history, including in three of the world's biggest and most powerful countries, the US, Russia, and India. The less powerful but potential flashpoint island of Taiwan will also go to the polls, a vote that China and the US will be watching very closely. Meanwhile, our global economy has witnessed massive inflation since the end of the COVID pandemic, and the gap between the world's wealthiest and poorest has grown to levels not seen in over a century. Here's a look now at what to watch out for in 2024.
The conflict in Gaza has been ongoing for almost 3 months, but the withdrawal of thousands of Israeli soldiers suggests 2024 will see a change in its course. Pressure from Tel Aviv's allies and divided opinion within Israel are among the causes of the retreat. The daily cost of the conflict for the country is reported to be $220 million. Analysts say these factors could now see the situation be led into a new long-term phase of low intensity. As for the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Moscow is reported to be ramping up its military spending, signaling it's preparing for a long war. The 2024 prediction of Ukraine beginning a major counter-offensive is now considered obsolete. At play here are its destabilized relations with its partners, resulting in challenges with funding and military support. With China's recent claim on the islands, citizens of Taiwan will go to the ballot box under the shadow of the mainland. Both running parties, the Democratic Progressive Party and the Kuomintang, also known as the Nationalist Party, are aware of this. That's why their campaigns put an emphasis on peacekeeping in the region. But the KMT has ties to Beijing, and Chinese officials openly admit a DDP win might increase the possibility of a military clash with the People's Republic. Just south of Taiwan, the waters are also reaching boiling point, so much so that Southeast Asian leaders recently released a statement calling all involved in the South China Sea matter to pursue a peaceful resolution. But Beijing already declared it will take resolute measures if the Philippines goes along with refurbishing Chinese de facto base in the region. One important date on the 2024 elections calendar is the US presidential race. Donald Trump's candidacy is jeopardized owing to legal problems. And, on the other hand, President Joe Biden will seek another term despite opposition from some party members concerned about his age. Both have negative approval ratings, but Trump is predicted to prevail through the Electoral College, even if Biden wins the popular vote. With his nationalist campaign, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is seeking a third term. During his reign, political opponents were sent to prison for insulting him, and more recently he suspended 141 opposition members of parliament. His critics warn that the 2024 general election is the last chance to stop him from transforming India into an illiberal Hindu supremacist state. The COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing global conflicts had a hand in the making of the ongoing economic crisis. For this year, the OECD reports global growth will be set to be modest. The expected weakness in trade will also likely take a toll. The expected outcome is decreased consumer confidence. This assumption paints a pessimistic picture, and on top of it all, the mild slowdown of 2024 is expected to change only in 2025 to slightly improved.
So, from pivotal elections to the economy and, of course, conflict, what is set to change in 2024, and will it make the world a better place? Well, joining me now to debate that are from London, the deputy editor of The Economist magazine, Tom Standage. From New Delhi is Jayati Ghosh, an actual Economist. And from the state of Colorado is Thomas Frey, Executive Director and Senior Futurist at the DaVinci Institute. Thanks all so much for being with me. Tom Standage, first, if you can, give me a broader view about the year ahead and how you are feeling about it. Would you describe yourself as, apprehensive, anxiety-ridden, or is this your kind of just more of, what the challenges we've seen in years past?
I think it's particularly difficult this year to find anything to be optimistic about, I have to admit. There's obviously an upsurge in conflict, and we also have an enormous number of elections happening this year, and some of those have really, quite serious consequences depending on how they go. By our count, it's something like 75 countries are having national elections. So that's not necessarily elections for the head of state or the parliament, but elections where everyone in the country gets to vote. So Turkey would be an example of that, because I believe there are municipal elections across the whole of Turkey. And we think if you add up all the people who live in all the countries that are having elections around the world this year, it's 4.2 billion, which is the highest it's ever been, and it's the first time it's more than half of the world's population. So on the face of it, that's a great triumph for democracy and a cause for optimism, but in practice there is an enormous variation in the quality of those democracies. And for example, the Russian election in March, I can tell you right now who's going to win that, so that's not really an election, is it? Whereas in Britain, where I'm talking to you from, we are going to have an election later this year, and it looks very likely that the government will get chucked out. And being able to chuck your government out is like the main feature of a democracy, and if you can't do that, it's not really a democracy. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus on the state of democracy, mostly in a quite depressing way, in particular because of the American election and the global implications that would follow from a second Trump term. And whether you agree with his policies or not, I think you would have to agree that a second Trump term would certainly be very unpredictable and very disruptive.
And Tom, let me just ask you quickly, because I know your publication in particular has focused a lot on the dynamics between China and Taiwan and the U.S. Taiwan is also having an election. Are you nervous about that?
Yes, I think that's the other big election that we've got an eye on, because again, the Indian election, the biggest of all, we pretty much know that Narendra Modi is going to do very well and his party is going to do very well. So yes, I think the Taiwanese election in a couple of weeks is going to really set the tone for not just relations across the Taiwan Strait with China, but also US-China relations more generally. And it does look most likely that William Lai, the DPP candidate, will win. And he is, he's the most sort of independence-leaning candidate, I think you would say. And so potentially, that could lead to an increase in tensions, both between China and Taiwan, but also between the US and China. So those are two big things to watch. And the other big thing, of course, is that we don't know where Donald Trump stands on this. So there is a school of thought that says that China is most likely to make a move on Taiwan sometime in the next 4 or 5 years. In other words, during the term of whoever gets elected in America in November, because America is beefing up its presence, its military presence in Asia Pacific, but that's not really going to bear fruit until the 2030s. So in theory, the Chinese might want to move first. And so, and the thing is about Donald Trump is that on the one hand, he wants to be strong against China, whatever that means. But on the other hand, he doesn't seem very keen on defending America's allies unless they sort of give him money directly, or unless they're paying America for sort of protection, which Taiwan, in his view, this is a bad deal for America. So he really could go either way. And we don't know what he would do if there was a Chinese provocation. I think an invasion is unlikely, in the next couple of years, but we're certainly likely to see provocations both as a result of the Taiwanese election and the American election, so that China can see where people stand.
Oof, lots to look forward to. Okay, Jayati Ghosh, let me turn to you. Your focus really is on the economy. And we know there's a bit of a debate over whether or not the global economy has actually improved and delivered to the poorest of the poor. A lot of people say it has. I'm sure, Tom would agree that, the global level of poverty has, gotten much better. People are not struggling in the way that they used to historically, but others are saying that the wealth gap we are seeing today just says it all. Where do you stand, and where is it going in 2024?
Well, I'm firmly among the people who argue that inequality has increased massively, and I'm actually surprised that there's a debate about this, because it's not just wealth inequality. There's also income inequalities that have increased dramatically. the argument that, in fact, the world got better in the period of globalization is really based on the performance of China and India. But neither country actually followed the classic neoliberal play script, particularly China, which was a very much state-led expansion. So I think, there are many problems with that particular paradigm. I do believe that paradigm has failed. And it has failed also because it created such massive material insecurity among people. And so it's not just the really incredible increases in inequality that we see, but it's also the fact that there is associated with that not just lack of improvement in many people's lives, but a definite deterioration in terms of very sharply increased insecurity, which is the problem, and which is what will drive something like a Trump re-election and so on. So, the idea that you have to just watch the elections to see what comes up and then say, oh, good or bad. No, there are reasons why these things are happening. There are reasons why the far right is making such strides in Western Europe. There are reasons why Trump may well win the next US election. And there are reasons why so much of the so-called developing world, one doesn't really know how many are still developing, feel not just extremely frustrated, but a complete lack of legitimacy of the multilateral system. But I just want to highlight, what do we expect in 2024? It's not just about whether some parties win elections in certain countries and so on. It's really about the major global challenges that humanity is facing, which are all getting very significantly worse. I mean, the climate challenge hasn't been mentioned yet, but it is huge and it is ongoing. It's happening. It's happening. It's creating massive displacement, worsening of conditions, declining agricultural productivity, rising sea waters, the lack of viability of many economic activities and of habitations. There is the geopolitical tension, of course, but there is also the fact that there are wars. I would like to mention the ongoing genocide in the Gaza Strip, for example, which also contribute to a sense of the global order failing dramatically. And you cannot create peace at the very minimum. You can't really do very much else.
I must say, Jayati, you go to certain countries in the world. I mean, you just mentioned between, Israel and Gaza right now, but certain countries you've seen the dynamics, countries maybe like South Africa, for example, where you see the level of poverty and you see that wealth gap, and it's not sustainable. It feels like a tinderbox when you're there. Where are you?
Well, I live in a country. I live in such a country. I live in a country in which real wages have not increased in the last decade. And yet our economy is supposed to be growing at 10%.
The thing I think with India, though, is that you just don't see the uprisings you might see in other countries. That frustration doesn't manifest on the street in a violent way against the government the way it can in other places. So where are the real trouble spots? I mean, is India then the country that worries you the most going forward, where it might just reach breaking point?
It's a lot of people. I would say it's a lot of people. It's almost 1 billion people whose economic conditions have not improved and some of whom are feeling much worse. Now, to say that it didn't manifest in violent uprising against the government is one thing, but it does manifest in many other kinds of violence. And we experience it and we're living it. Violence against other communities and religions, against other castes, against other language speakers. And it comes out because of this frustration. So, everybody makes a big deal about Trumpians in particular parts of the US, but we are experiencing terrible violence in our society, which, doesn't get noticed in the northern media. And may I add, doesn't get noticed at all by The Economist.
I would dispute that. Hang on a minute. We are criticised quite often by Indians for going on too much about the plight of Muslims in particular in India, and we're impressed by Narendra Modi when it comes to some of his economic policies, but we are less impressed by the Hindu nationalism side of things. And so
that's the failure to see the link between the two is a really important failure.
Okay.
The failure to see the link between the economic policies and the violence is a very major failure.
I'll tell you what, I'll try to get back to this now, but I do want to get Thomas Frey into the debate because, Thomas, we heard one of our panelists say apprehensive. Jayati doesn't seem necessarily optimistic about the year to come. You, however, You're a little bit less cynical, I would say, than the rest. You think there are some things to look forward to and that the world, as a general trend, maybe is on the up. You can correct me if I'm misinterpreting you. But why do you think there's real improvement on the horizon? What gives you hope?
Yeah, well, first of all, the the technology that we have right now is creating an awareness of everything happening around the world, which actually, once we're aware of things going on in the world, it becomes very depressing because we tend to focus on all the things that have gone wrong. There are lots and lots of things that have gone right. And so people have been worried about AI and robotics and lots of other technology actually eliminating all the jobs. Well, it's not, the technology is not eliminating the jobs. It'll be somebody with AI that shows up that takes your job. It'll be somebody with a robot that shows up that takes your job. And so the technology becomes central to all of the things that we're going to accomplish in the future. Now, the technology not only enables us to do things faster and quicker, it enables us to take on much larger projects than we ever have in the past. And we're going to start seeing a number of mega projects come into play just as a way to keep people employed, keep them busy, and actually make some rather interesting inroads into what our future is going to look like. So it's the same technology that is eliminating jobs is the same technology that's going to be creating the new jobs of the future. So rather than avoid the robotics, avoid the AI and avoid fintech and all of these things, we should be embracing those because that's where the new technology of the future is coming from.
So, Thomas Frey, I mean,
yeah.
it's hard to reconcile because, I mean, I've done a few programs actually on AI. And a lot of the experts we've spoken to are almost scared of what could happen. And it's not even talking about the job replacement, that is an aspect of it, but it's also just about the unknowns of this technology and how dangerous it could get because it is so powerful. Why are you not concerned at all? And why do you think they are kind of crying wolf when there's nothing to worry about?
I didn't say there's nothing to worry about. I mean, the biggest danger of AI
Less.
right now is putting it in the hands of a devious person. Um, the AI itself is not good or bad. It's how we use it. And so I think becomes just like any other technology. We can leverage it for good or we can leverage it for bad. And we have to figure out how to regulate it so that we don't leverage it for just the bad things.
Okay.
And I think we'll figure that out, just as we figured it out with nuclear weapons, or whether we figured it out with just the invention of guns and armored vehicles and things like that. So this is just another stepping stone to what comes next, and we have lots of other interesting technology coming down the pike, whether it's nuclear fusion, whether it's quantum computing, any number of new tech issues are going to be hitting us next year that are uniquely different than this year.
Tom Standage, does hearing that make you feel any more optimistic about 2024?
Well, I am optimistic. I am a techno-optimist as well. I think that the scary stories told about AI are completely overblown. I don't think the killer robots are coming. I'm also not that worried about robots coming for our jobs either. In the OECD countries at the moment, employment is at a record high. There is absolutely no sign of this technology taking anyone's jobs. And there is quite a lot of evidence emerging that it could boost productivity. And that's exactly what we need in Western countries with aging and shrinking workforces. Either we all get poorer or we need to increase productivity, and automation and AI is the way to do that, by making individual workers more productive. So I am optimistic about that technology, which many other people are gloomy about. I'm also optimistic about clean tech and quantum computing. I just don't think any of those things are going to really manifest themselves in 2024 in a way that makes a lot of difference to the plight of the world. And so I have to distinguish between what I think is going to happen this year and what I think is going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. So I'm optimistic about the course of technology generally looking forward, and its ability to solve our problems as it has done in the past. I don't see anything in 2024 in particular that's going to help. Quantum is not going to do anything in 2024, for example, but it is making, I think, some quite rapid progress now, and so forth.
Jayat, let me get the Economist perspective, the actual Economist,
No,
not the magazine. Yeah, go ahead, Jayati, because yeah, I mean,
no,
there is a fear for
agree.
so many that this is just going to take more jobs away from lower skilled workers in particular.
I mean, technology has always done that. Technology has always displaced his labor through history. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. What is critical is the transition. Can you actually ensure that new jobs are created? So that's the question. And that's an economic policy or an economic strategic choice of governments. It's not something that is, coming from above that you can do nothing about. Because there are many other kinds of jobs that can be created. I believe that most of the new jobs of the future would come in the care industries and in the creative industries. And that's a good thing. I mean, but it depends on government policy to actively promote such jobs. So I agree. I think technologies are great. I mean, and we should definitely not fear them, take advantage of them. But simultaneously, we must ensure that those who are going to be displaced do have other productive work, that the economy is generating other jobs. And that's easier said than done. In the Indian economy, for example, we are not generating new jobs. Supposedly, recently, employment rates have gone up. Why? Because of more unpaid women working in family enterprises, unpaid. Now, that's not employment generation. So, in other words, we really have to think of employment generation as a central economic concern. Far too few governments actually do that. The US is one of the few that actually puts it out there in terms of both the central bank policy and the government policy. Very few governments look at the quantity and quality of employment as one of their most critical policy variables. They're all looking at GDP growth, which can give you what they're giving India: fabulous growth for the top 10% and for large capital and for global capital, which is why the Economist loves that economic policy. But really nothing for the majority of the people.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a disaster.
Exactly. And if it doesn't implode, let me ask Thomas Frey, how long can we wait before we see these kinds of, game-changing benefits you're talking about in technology?
Oh, we're going to see some of them right away. I mean, the real aggressive people are taking advantage of all this technology. They're speeding up whatever they're doing, whether it's writing books, whether magazine articles, whether it's producing movies, or whatever line of work that they're in. They are far more capable now than they've ever been in history, and the amount of things that they can get done in a single day is actually exploding. So what we can accomplish over a lifetime is going to continue to increase. And this becomes a real interesting metric that we don't currently have any good way of measuring our lifetime accomplishment. But if you actually think about 10 years from now being able to accomplish 10x, 10 times in a lifetime what you did in the past, that's kind of what we're moving into. All of this with, I know that I can sit down and I can actually hash out a business plan for a new startup business, and I can do that online in less than an afternoon and create a really good business plan and get started on something new. This is something that would have taken 4 or 5 months in the past.
Yeah.
And I've seen this over and over again. These tools are really the tools that are of new creations, things coming out of left field. And we're not going to see the effect of this for quite some time. But a lot of the new startups that are gaining traction right now have actually been started 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, if the world can wait, it could be just amazing. But let me, I've got 1.5 minutes left. Tom, I'll just finish with you, Tom Standage. I mean, like I said, it might be some time before we really see these benefits, and there's a lot happening right now, especially in the realm of conflict. And when we're looking particularly at Israel and Gaza and how many people fear that kind of spiraling out of control, becoming more of a global dynamic and harming the global equilibrium, how much are you worried about that?
Oh, very worried about that. So I think, the big question now is whether this does turn into a broader regional conflict. And just generally, we are seeing more conflict more around the world. We're seeing countries are increasing, their spending, military spending. People are assuming there is going to be more conflict in the future rather than less. And in fact, looking back since the fall of the Soviet Union, we essentially had a holiday from history in many ways. We had 30 years of relatively low amounts of great power conflict, relatively low interest rates, relatively low inflation rates, and now we've got this sort of period of much more disruption, much more conflict, much more uncertainty. And so I'm afraid that's why I find it difficult to be terribly optimistic about 2024. Sorry.
Okay, now understood.
Can I just say, it's not just about whether the conflict spreads and gets people in the north. It's really about how long the world can tolerate genocide without consequence.
Yeah. Jayati, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Great to have you and your insights for the year going forward. Thank you so much. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.